clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. All right, thank you all so much for coming to this presentation. We know it's kind of like we're trying to figure it out as we go, and we're really excited. We're going to make this interactive, so you're not going to be kind of listening to us the whole time. So I'm Conchita Hernandez. I have like a dual role here at MSB and at MSDE. I'm really excited to be here. And
I'm Shannon Egan. I'm a school age performance specialist at MSDE, and I'm on Conchita's team.
So we're going to go, hopefully you've all done the pretest. We're going to go over it right now because we hoped we tricked you a little bit. So who has it pulled up? Or the paper version? What's your name?
You may grab a paper.
Yeah, that way we can read it.
Can I grab a?
So the first question was especially the trick question. So depending on how much information has trickled down, we've realized like things have happened statewide on trainings and maybe only one person from MSB attended, and so things don't necessarily get trickled down. All right.
So the first question is, what should you use to write high quality compliant IEPs? We have SMART goals, the 5 components, talking to your student, updating the goal from last year, or none of the above. If you could just like say what you chose and want to volunteer.
Or what about if you chose A, which is SMART goals, say I.
Aye.
All right, if you chose, okay, go ahead, because I can't actually see it.
You're good. B, the 5 components.
Aye.
If you chose talking to your student, that's good. If you chose updating the goal from last year, or if you chose none of the above.
All right, I love that it was split between SMART goals and the 5 components, and this is why. We were all trained in SMART goals. However, in the state of Maryland, we require the 5 components. And for some of you, it's like, what? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So one of the things, when any system is audited through MSDE, let's say you have the most beautiful goal, and you have everything except you're missing one of the things we're requiring, it's not the same as SMART goals, you're 100% non-compliant. And so we do require more than what you would require in a SMART goal. So we're going to go through and kind of workshop what that would look like.
Perfect. Do you want to go through the other 2?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay. And then the next one was true or false. So listen to the goal, and then we're going to share whether we think it's true or false. By June 8th, 2024, Jimmy will type all the letters of the alphabet on a keyboard by touch with 75% accuracy. If you said true, say aye.
Aye.
If you said false.
Aye.
So why is it not compliant?
No retention.
Say that again?
There's no retention.
Yes. And that's kind of the main difference between a SMART goal and the 5 components, is that you have to show how that retention happens. And we're going to talk about that. But I also love those of you that are like, I said yes, and you're the only ones, like, be that brave person who speaks up, please.
I have a question about it.
Yes.
I was one of those. I'm being afraid. So.
I love it.
So sometimes people will write the goal to say out of 4 out of 5 trials, and then sometimes it'll be written with 80% accuracy. So how do you...
That's totally fine. Like, and we're going to talk about that a little bit.
Yep.
It doesn't matter if you use a percentage or 4 to 4, or for some goals we want 100%. Like if you're writing an O&M goal for a kid across the street, I'm hoping it's 100%, right? So it doesn't matter. You can use a percentage. You can use even like a Likert scale of like, 1 through 4. What matters is that does it make sense for what you're assessing? So sometimes we'll see goals of like 75% accuracy in, and there's 3 things you're measuring. Like, you can't get 75% out of the 3 things. So like somehow we've gotten in our heads that we have to put a percentage and we have to do the 3 and sometimes it doesn't connect. So it doesn't matter. In like it could be a percentage, it could be 3 out of 4. It kind of depends on the goal, and we're going to go over that today. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You already spoiled the last question.
Oh, whoops.
The last question was, if 2 or fewer of the required parts of a goal are missing, the goal is considered compliant. True or false? False. Yeah, there we go.
So just keep that in mind. If you're missing one of the things, MSDE is like, it's 100% uncompliant, which is, it kind of sucks, right? Because you'd hope it'd be like, okay, you're 50% compliant, but no.
Okay.
All right, go ahead. So let me say something real quick on the handout. So we have this handout. If you do require a large print version, we have one at the table. And we also have this electronically that we can send out to everybody after the session as well.
Yes. So if you don't have a handout, they're on the end of the table. It'll be helpful to follow through it as we're going over it. But this was in our specially designed instruction guide from 2019. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a couple years old, but all this information is still relevant and still good information and still what the auditors are looking for at MSDE when you're writing goals. So these are one-pagers for each of the 5 components. And I'm going to be untraditional, and we're going to start on the second component because I think it makes the most sense when you're writing a goal. So if you want to flip to the second page, it's actually page 72 in the guide. I don't know about the large print number.
The large print will tell you what page the original one is, so just look for page 72 as well.
Thank you. So anytime you're writing an IEP goal, there are 3 things you need to think of first before you even start writing the goal. The first thing is, what is my baseline data telling me? So you should have some sort of baseline data related to the area that that goal is going to be in. If you're writing a goal in reading comprehension, it doesn't matter how many words per minute they can read. So you have to have baseline data that's relevant to that goal. And it should be in your path page, so it should be easy to locate that.
So an example of that, if like a typing goal, like where's the student starting out, right? Or like you're doing an O&M goal, where is the student starting out before you take a look at where you're going to go?
And then you also need to think about how you're going to progress monitor that goal. And we're going to talk about progress monitoring a lot as we're talking about these components. But you have to have a plan in place of how you're going to monitor the progress before you write the goal.
So an example of this, we actually did the same workshop in another unnamed county, I'm going to say. And they had this really nice written goal about typing, and they were going to use Typing Tutor. And they were like, we're going to do 75% accuracy. And I'm like, what is the measure that Typing Tutor inherently uses in the system? It's like, don't recreate an assessment if Typing Tutor is already giving you the data. And they're like, I'm not sure. I'm like, so how can you write the goal when you don't know how you're going to assess the student? So then they went in, checked out how Typing Tutor actually did the assessment, and then they were able to say, and I don't remember, but they were able to say, okay, words per minute or whatever. You have to know what tool you're going to use to assess before you can figure out, is it a percentage, is it 2 out of 3? Because if you're using, there's some that are already done and made, figure out what you're going to use, how that measure does it, and then put that in your goal.
Perfect. And then the other thing to think about is, no matter who you're writing an IEP for, one goal needs to be a grade level goal. If you have a student that is grade level but has an IEP for vision or has O&M, they still need a grade level academic goal. So that part's kind of hard to think about because I was an inclusion teacher for 8 years and I never wrote grade level goals.
And there was a county, who will also be named, who got monitored and they were found uncompliant because they had academic students, right, with IEPs, and they were like, this kid is on grade level. They don't need reading, they don't need math. And they were like, nope, you still, and I fought with them about it and I lost. I fought with MSDE about it and I lost. And so what we're saying is, figure out what the student needs to work on and tie it to the grade level thing. So for example, let's say this kid is on grade level and you're doing Braille instruction with them. Then use the goal of using Braille to tie it to reading, right? And that's how you can make your grade level goal. But you have to have it regardless of where academically the student is. We could do a whole nother workshop on what to do with those students when they're very, very low performing and how to make that tie-in, and we can do that later. Or if you want a specific department training on that, maybe for Nick's group about how to do that. But regardless of where they are in very, very low functioning or very, very high academic, they need to have a grade level aligned goal. Yes.
Oh, I have a question. So
yes.
What if you have a student who your focus is on self-advocacy or self-determination? Can you give us an example of what you would write?
So my
for a
question
goal?
is, why would they have an IEP?
Well, if they're visually impaired.
So then what is it so visual impairment doesn't give you an automatic IEP, and so that's kind of complicated. So the eligibility, and I feel like maybe we should start there, the eligibility, and it's hard because sometimes you get these kids already, and so you already have them, and you're not well, we're not going to take them off an IEP, but the eligibility should be because somehow it impacts their education. And so if they have self-advocacy only, I would just be like, what else is it that is, like, are they using a magnifier to access their print? Like, how can you tie in the technology piece to the reading instruction? Or how can you tie in, like, find a way to tie it in? But and again, you guys get IEPs from the counties, so we're trying to weed out the ones that shouldn't be here. But if you do get a student that, like, we're also willing to brainstorm with you and figure out how to do it. So if you really get stuck, feel free to reach out to us and we'll brainstorm, like, okay, how to make it work. Because I disagree with it, and I fought, oh, you're recording it, never mind. Delete that part. And I fought MSD and I lost, so.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
So then you would just, I see what you're saying, what to do now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like if they're learning to use like a handheld magnifier, they would learn the 5 functions of the Mag Connect to read
grade level and tie it to the, like, if they're in third, I'm making it up, like if third grade is, reading 3 CVC words, they use the magnifier to read 3 CVC words. Yeah.
That makes more sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else first? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and start talking about the 5 components. That's where we flip to the second page, page 72, because this is the behavior piece, and I don't know why it's not first, but this is what you want your student to do. So this is that observable behavior that you're looking for your student to do when you're writing a goal. And the important thing is to make sure that it's written observably, so that not only you can see it, but that anyone that picks up the IEP can see it and figure it out.
Yeah, and our goal is that our students, right, like when they leave us, and our goal is that they go back to their county, and when somebody gets the IEP that you wrote and looks at the goal, are they going to be like, I have no idea, and I'm sure you get IEPs like that all the time, right, I have no idea what this is supposed to mean, that they can look at the IEP and get a really clear idea of, okay, this is what they used, this is how they did it, and this is what it looks like.
Perfect. And the thing I really like about all these one-pagers is like the second paragraph of each section has like questions to think about when you're writing that goal. So the questions to think about when you're considering the behavior are: what specific skills will the student demonstrate? What will the staff member working with the student observe to determine progress? So that's where you're going to start, and that should be based on your baseline data that you already have provided. And when you're selecting a behavior, you have to have the data to support that the student needs that. The grade level is kind of the only iffy section. But if you're writing a goal, you would just use like the grade level standard to do that. And then the back side of these has some examples. And it has some like word choices. Bless you. So instead of having someone say they will increase, you can say that they will increase their reading fluency to a certain number of words per minute. So making sure that it's specific enough that you know what you're looking for and anyone else knows what they're looking for as well.
So like something we see a lot is improve, achieve. Okay, so what measure, where? Like they're gonna improve by a certain amount to a certain point. Like make sure you can quantify what that means.
Yes. Any questions about the behavior? Okay, so now I'm going to flip back to the first page, sorry. I didn't want to change the order they were in there because then the numbers would be different, and So the second thing to consider is the condition, and this is what you are providing that student to meet that behavior. So this is where it would be considering or given grade level text, given a hundreds chart, given a magnifier. So this is what you are providing the student to achieve that goal.
And it could be like, if O&M, right? Like given, like what does the environment look like that the student is doing this task in?
Yes.
Or like given Braille, given whatever it is.
Yep. And it kind of goes into that. So there's that second paragraph with those really nice questions I like. I'm not going to read them to you because I know you can read. But then the conditions there, so it could be materials. So it could be like physical items you're giving them. It could be assistance, so prompting with or without adult support. Directions you're giving them, if you're giving them specific directions, visual directions, verbal directions, however you're giving those. And then environment, like Conchita said, so that relates a lot more to the functional goals and using spaces and places and different contexts for those goals.
And you could do like, if they have a particular lighting situation, right, that this is where it should happen, or a particular, group setting where this is done maybe, in a certain setting that is different than what they would be in general ed.
And then it also has some things that you should consider when you're making those conditions. So in order for your conditions to be effective for that student, they have to provide the framework for the instructions. They have to give the required items that the student needs. If we know a student's reading 3 grade levels below, we're not going to make their only reading goal a grade level text. So we would think about what they need to be successful.
Yeah, and this is a question we get a lot because we do require the grade level goal. So if your student is on grade level, then just worry about the grade level goal. If your student, for example, in reading is not at grade level, you need a grade level goal that aligns to the grade you're in, and then you would need a goal of where they're at. So you need those 2 type of goals. And that's what gets a little confusing sometimes, especially and that relates to the academics. It does not relate to like the functional O&M, stuff like that. So you have to have the grade level goal of the grade they're in, not the grade they're functioning, and then you could do another goal for where they're at and how they're going to get there.
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If we're supposed to be writing goals that are achievable by our students, so if we have a student who is functioning at a 6 month age bracket, let's take 6 months, okay? And we're having to write a 4th grade goal. Are we allowed to back map it to their skills?
Yes,
Not
100%.
4th grade skills?
Yes, 100%. You can absolutely back
You're
map
saying we can
it.
still continue to back map like we're doing now?
So I guess I don't know exactly what you mean by back mapping and how you do it, as long as it is clear that it's a 4th grade, what is it called?
Goal?
No.
Standard.
Standard, right? So as long as you can see that it's a 4th grade standard, so I'm going to make something up. So let's say the 3rd grade standard is the CVC, and this child is like very, very, as long as you still are like, the child is going to be presented with CVC words, right, that connects to the 4th grade standard.
So I haven't written an IEP yet this year, but in the past there has been a drop-down box for all academic goals where you go and locate the standard strand and the standard for that connects to it.
Yep.
Is that good enough to be able to, if you just find a good goal and make sure that they make sense together, or do you have to write the goal specifically to include, for example, in reading grade level text or in math, whatever the math standard is for that grade? Do you have to put that into the IEP goal the way that we write it, or is it okay to just make sure it makes sense connecting it to that drop down?
I think we need to do a whole follow-up on this I'm calling you out, Nick, in your department, because you guys have these students. Because we could do a whole session just on that, and there's a specific way to do it. Because it's not easy. It's not a simple thing. And we actually have like and I'm not sure what you all are using, but we actually have like a back mapped way of like, this is the grade that they're in, and then this is how you can look at it down. But I would recommend that we do a whole session just on that, because it's a very complex to do for those students. And I agree with you all that for those students it's kind of hard to figure out.
Well, I'm trying to figure out if you're asking us to do something very different from what we've already been taught to do. For example, when Carol Secondton was my supervisor, she taught me, and they had Kathy Dunnigan come around with like specific books that helped you go backwards from the grade level standard to the most, like the basic initial and working skills.
I'm not sure, because I don't know what it is you all use. So what we would have to do is take a look at what it is you all were using.
They use the math in English.
The dynamic
Oh, the dynamic mapping. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Because that's what we recommend.
So we
But
write
I think the issue is, you can use dynamic mapping. I think the issue is how the goal is written ultimately. So like, one thing is using the tool of the dynamic map, and the other thing is then taking that and making sure you're writing a goal that we recognize as like, yes, this makes sense. And I think that's where the issue is. because the dynamic map is totally fine. Like, we actually recommend that. I think the issue becomes, how are we taking a look at that? And I think what might be helpful as well, it's as you all know, there's lots of intricacy, like politics is the worst. And so we have a whole team that just monitors. And so we work with them to be like, this is how you need to do this part. But I think they need to be included in that conversation as well when we do that, to be like, this is how we're looking at it and how we're interpreting it. Because their lens is, this is IDEA, this is COMAR. And so like the thing I fought them on a couple things and they're like, no. So part of it is getting them to be a part of the conversation so we can understand how are you interpreting it, because it may be different how you're doing it. Because I'm not sure how it is you all are doing it. So we should definitely.
I'll say we were monitored last year.
And you were fine, right?
This was not a fine year, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you're
So
good.
that drop-down menu, as long as it makes sense, is
Yeah,
probably
you
working
can't write something that's obviously for a kindergartner and just say, well, but it's a fourth grade goal.
Right.
I mean, so you've got to be able to connect it and logically look at it. But
Right.
that is not an area where we have finding of any kind. So
Okay.
we're doing
I have a question for those of us that are in related services. We don't
Yeah.
necessarily work off of a grade or a scope and sequence for that. So
Yeah, that's fine.
How
So
do we-
you don't have to do that for every single goal. So like, because those are like functional, what we call like functional. So as long as the child has that for one thing, you're fine. So like, let's say you have a child who has those goals for reading, and you're coming in and providing maybe PT, OT, whatever. You don't have to worry about that.
okay.
But the child has to have it in their IEP at least for one. Yeah, that's a great question.
Good.
I have a question. If a child is at its goal, as far as the fourth grader that comes into you, do you do an IEP to keep it on that level, or do you do an IEP that they could go a little above?
An IEP goal?
If you're doing an IEP goal,
Uh-huh.
and they already on that level, do you do an IEP to get them, to maintain that level or go above?
So is that level grade? That's grade. They're on grade level?
It would stay on grade level.
Yeah, it would.
If they have other services that
Yeah.
they need the IEP for, the goal would stay grade
Yeah.
level.
So it's just an IEP for things that they are not at that particular level?
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, and that's the whole point of a goal, right? The whole point of every single goal in the IEP is that they're not where they're supposed to be, or that they're getting some additional support to get there. So like O&M and the related services are a little different because there's no grade level necessarily, right? It's like different measures. But the other thing should be like, they're behind in this area, so that's why they're receiving this type of support. But that's great. That's a great scenario to have.
Yeah, because I'm looking at when you were saying at the fourth grade level, and if they below, they have an IEP. And suppose you have a child that's already at that level,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Do an IEP only for those things that they are below, is that what you're saying?
So there's two different things. Like, because every single kid in this school has an IEP.
That's why I
So,
would give it action. That
Right.
Every student here, or let's say in general, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, what students are considered to have IEPs?
so it depends. That's a whole eligibility question. So there's like 11 different categories that you become eligible for an IEP. So like vision is one, but it has to have an educational impact. So it depends. Some of our kids are made eligible under a lot of different categories. And for visual impairment, it's like educational impact, which is done by a functional vision assessment. And so you don't really have to worry about that, only because every single child you get here will automatically have an IEP. If they don't have an IEP, they cannot enroll here. So, but yeah, that's a really good question. But there's a lot of eligibility areas, yeah.
Go ahead, all the way in the back.
This is something different from the back mapping that we're currently doing. Would you be able to provide us with an example of an academic IEP goal for a student who's working over grade level?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I can't off the top of my head, but yes.
Yeah. Off the top of my head. It's Friday at 2:17. My brain is not working too much either. But we can provide
Yeah,
examples.
absolutely.
Go ahead.
Just a quick question about the grade level goal, and you said one, is it one per subject or just one total?
Per IEP.
So the thing is, it's area of need, right? So if the child is behind in reading, they should have it for reading. If the child is behind in math, they should have it for math. Yeah, so the question is, like, if the child is academic in, like, all their areas and they're not behind, then just you need it just in one.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if they're behind in all areas, do we need one in all academic areas?
Yes. So if they're behind in reading, they should have it for reading. If they're behind in math, they should have it for math. So I'm sorry, not all academic areas in the way that you all see it. So academic in the two, in reading and in math.
Okay. Any other questions?
You have really good questions.
Okay. So on that back side of their page, there's some more examples of conditions, like grade level, stories, communication devices, color-coded materials. So if you're trying to figure out some conditions you can use, think about what the student needs to meet that behavior and meet that goal. And then if you need some examples, if you're having a hard time thinking of some, you can refer back to this.
And like, especially for our kids with multiple disabilities that maybe have a communication device, that can be your condition, or a button that they press, whatever it is, that can be your condition.
Okay, we're gonna go to criteria, which is on page 74. So we're skipping over behavior because we started there. So the criteria, this is where I feel like everyone in the state gets tripped up because there's two criteria that the state is looking for the goal to be compliant. So we have mastery and we have retention. So mastery is that they've mastered the skill that you're looking for, the behavior you're looking for with the condition. Retention is that they've retained that skill over some period of time to show that they have continued mastery of it.
And if you're doing a SMART goal, this is the part where we're missing. I never wrote goals like this either, so we're all on the same page.
Neither did I. So the biggest thing to think about is thinking about the students' current data, the baseline data, and where you expect them to go, because it has to be achievable, like someone said. But it also has to be challenging enough that they're going to need some sort of SDI to meet that goal. And the biggest thing is that the criteria can be for like yes or no options.
Yeah.
So it doesn't just have to be like the 80% or the 4 out of 5. You can totally use those if they make sense. But if you have a student trying to read Braille, I don't want them to read 3 out of 4 words on the page. I want them to read all of the words. So it can be 100%. And that's where the objectives will really help you work up to that goal. But also, it can be, one of the criteria can be independently. If you have a student that needs a lot of prompting, the goal can be working towards doing something completely independently, especially in like the related services and functional world. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And then make sure that the objectives build to that goal. So when you're looking at your mastery or retention piece, if it is 100% independently, you have to think, how is a student going to get there from where they are? If they're at 0, it's going to take a lot of work to get to 100. So your objectives can work up to that. Or maybe you need to consider how you can meet the student in the middle, so that they're achieving that goal, and then you can continue on with that.
And someone had a really good question. I forget who it was. Someone had a really good question during Welcome Week about like a goal where student starts at 0 and trying to get to 10. It's up to you. Like, there's nothing that says, like, even if it's something that's already created and they have it up to 10, and you know, like, it's impossible for this kid, you don't have to use it up to 10. You could write your goal to 1. You could write your goal to 2. So just keep in mind, like, it's the whole point of the IEP is that you figure out kind of what's right for that student. So when you're thinking of the retention, think of how will I know in the long term? So will I know that they've retained it by them doing it one time? Probably not. And that's the whole point of this part. So is it that they're going to do it 100% over 5 consecutive sessions, right? That's how you know that they've actually retained it, as opposed to they did it one and it was a one-off, right? So think of how you will know that they actually mastered it. Is it, again, that they are doing it independently without being prompted? Is it that they're able to do it over a 3-month period without being prompted independently? Like, think of how you're going to know that they reach that 80% beyond maybe that one time you assessed them, it was a one-off.
Conchita, can I add something?
Yeah.
And I know this has come up in multiple teams, and I think a lot of people are like changing their thinking. And retention was new to me because I came from a district where we did SMART goals and retention was not part of goals. So I was like, what do you mean across like 4 sessions? Like, but that's what you guys do here, which is great. But just keep in mind, like, because so many of our kiddos have like chronic absences, be careful how you word it, because if you say like in 1 quarter and then they're absent that entire quarter, they're never going to meet the goal because of the way it was worded. So like be creative in how you word it, you know, instead of consecutive weeks, consecutive sessions, because if they miss umpteen you know, weeks, it's still consecutive sessions when they are here. So just think about that when you're writing that piece, because that was all new learning for me.
Yeah, and that is, I think, the biggest shift. And if you answered SMART goal, that's going to be the biggest shift, is getting that retention piece. And it's not easy. It's once you get it, it becomes natural. But to get to that point, it takes a little bit.
I also came from a county where we didn't do this.
I never did this either.
So it was hard to figure, like, to wrap my head around. And the other thing is making sure that it's appropriate for the student. So we talked about making sure it's appropriate for the skill, depending on what you want the conditions to be, or the criteria to be, but also making sure it's appropriate for the student, depending on whatever your goal is going to be. And then the last bullet on page 75, at the top, it's on the back page, I think is very important. So making sure that the goal and the criteria are supporting instruction, but also supporting that progress monitoring. Making sure that you have a way to track this data. And what do I do if my students halfway through the year and like they got an IEP at the end of last year, second quarter, they're probably not going to get to their goal. The biggest thing to know is you can amend the IEP. And you can amend the IEP without a team meeting. You just have to do the PWN. So if you're not changing the goal drastically, like if you're adjusting the percentage because they're working at a slower pace, you can amend the goal to meet the student where they are.
Without doing an IEP meeting. I just want to I know you'll have a lot of IEP meetings, so just make sure it's very, very explicit in your prior written notice. This is what we're requesting, this is why. Because also one of our goals as school-wide is that more of our students will meet their IEP goals. And so if you are in the second quarter and the student is not making progress, is it that you have to maybe increase the intensity, right? Like, it's not just like they're not making progress, I hope what you get out of this is not let's lower everybody's percentages. Like, the kid isn't making progress, we're in the second monitoring cycle. Okay, do I need to maybe see this kid a little bit more often? Do I need to maybe change the setting? Like, you can do all of those things with a prior written notice without an IEP.
And you can always adjust the conditions. So maybe you think they need something else to get to that goal. Yes, thank you, Conchita. You can always change any part of the goal as long as it is in the same content area, and as long as you just have a conversation with the parent.
May I ask a question too? Does MSDE recommend like including baseline data like explicitly said in the IEP, like in the present level?
Yes. Yes. So one of the things we're looking at, and this could be a whole nother, we could do like 10 sessions out of this. One of the things we're looking at is in your present levels, does it match what your goals are? Like what we see is we see a goal for reading. Nothing in the present levels mentioned that this child had any issue with reading. So why is there a goal other than your academic? But let's say this kid is behind, right? So like there's a goal, but it's not being supported by baseline data in your present levels. So make sure in your present levels you're making the argument for why the goals need to exist. They need to tie into each other.
And it doesn't have to explicitly say like baseline data for reading comprehension goal. But if you're providing all this reading comprehension data, we'll be able to see that they're supported there.
And to put out a little plug, and maybe I shouldn't, is Becky in this session? So maybe, I'm not sure, let me tell me if this is not correct, but we're doing a session with just the service providers on, and we're bringing a monitoring person, and we're gonna go through the monitoring tool. So if you're not in Becky's department, and there's another department also.
It's all related services.
Oh, so you all will be there. Great. So, so we're gonna go through the monitoring tool so you can see this is what we're looking at specifically.
Any questions about criteria? It's kind of hard to wrap your head around, but I feel like when you're writing a goal, then you can think more specifically about how well I know they mastered it and how well I know they retained it. So if you look at the next page is method of measurement. So this goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. So this is that how are you progress monitoring? What are you using? It, like Conchita said about our example from another county, it could be something that the student's already doing, and then you're using that data to help you guide the goal and help you measure the goal. But if you're not using, or if you are using that, it has to make sense within the tool you're using. And if you're not using something that's already provided, you have to make sure that it connects to the goal and it connects to the baseline data.
And we know in our field, sometimes there's not a lot of stuff created, and so we end up creating a lot of it. But I think one thing we see also is like every single goal is like teacher created form, teacher created form, teacher created form. And that's okay. However, think of there are tools that exist and there are measurements, even if you're not using the exact measurement, like again, they're using it out of 10 and you're using it to get from 1 to 2, that's totally fine. But if you are using teacher created, have somewhere where you're explaining what that is, right? So if you created and this is what it includes, how is somebody, when the child goes back to the county, can be able to read that and be like, what is it that they created? Like, were they taking a note? What is it that they actually used to monitor this?
And you can write it specifically in the goal so that it makes sense. Like using a teacher created chart for the days of the week or for the sessions, whatever you're using. So you can include that language in the goal, especially if you're using something teacher created, that not everyone will know what it is.
Are you allowed to I think I can't swear that I've done this, but I'd like to say that I think I did. You can like Maryland online.
Yeah.
You can upload files.
to the
so
forms
you can
and logs.
just,
Yep.
like, upload it there. I think
And
I
that's
have
a
done that
great,
once.
I love that idea, Jackie, because everything you upload into the IEP system will follow the student until they graduate, right? And sometimes even farther. So if you're like, I know in the tool works, upload it and create that resource for whoever's going to have that student next.
Yep, that's a really good idea.
Yeah, that's really good.
I haven't seen it, but that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Don't look, but I think once.
I'm going to look at yours first thing on Monday.
Last name Otwell, I'm just kidding.
And then if you flip over the page, you'll see the other 2 criteria for the methods of measurement. So making sure that they're objective. And Conchita and I encountered this at our last goal training where we asked someone how they knew the student was like reaching for something, and they're like, oh, well, I can just tell by their eyes. And we're like, yeah, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, so it was like a goal about the student will be able to like, it was like a mid cross, right?
Yep.
Like crossing the midline to be able to reach, and we're like, okay, how will you know the student is successful? Because it wasn't even, the student wasn't there to already touch it physically, like they were just like in the process, so they were looking, and it's just like, I'll know. And it's like, okay, how do you know? I'll just know. Okay, but like if somebody else is doing it and then now they have the IEP, they're gonna guess what it is you use because you didn't write explicitly what it is that you are using.
Yep, and that goes with the when you give the IEP to anyone else, making sure that they're able to implement the IEP and use those goals. And then in the chart at the bottom, I want to highlight one thing. Conchita kind of talked about it. The very last item where it says use classroom break pass, but next to it says using data collection sheets. Here it says percentage of instances, so you can use a data collection sheet, but these can also be totally customized to your goal. So thinking about what makes sense to collect your data for that student.
And I feel like we could do a whole session just on progress monitoring. And I feel like when I was at TVI, I didn't do this well. But I feel like what I've learned since then is every time you see that student and you work on that goal, you should be doing that progress monitoring. So your goal should be so well written that whatever tool you're using, you're not just using that progress monitoring when you're looking to see how they are. Every single time you're working with that student, you should be having data on where they're at, And I don't know if Kristen agrees with this method, so I'm gonna put it out there, so tell me if you don't. Like, one thing that's super helpful is if you put your progress monitor into Google Forms and just send yourself the link, and that way literally on an iPad or on your phone you can be like boom, 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 and then it automatically captures it for you. So I'm a fan, but I don't know if that's if that's okay, allowed.
Whatever works.
Okay. Some counties are very particular about how they do stuff.
Okay. Any questions about method of measurement? I feel like that's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and as much as possible, don't recreate the wheel. Like, as much as possible, if you're teaching typing, what program are you using and how are they measuring, and use theirs. Don't create something new. Like, if you're doing reading intervention, if you're using a particular system that's already giving them a number, use what they're, like, don't recreate something all over again.
Conchita?
Yeah.
I'm just curious about that. So, like, with technology, like, we're not supposed to say iPad or brand names. So, like, but with typing software, we can say what we're using, and or do you mean, like, the specific measurement? You're not talking about brand.
So if you're using a specific, because you can mention a specific, for method of measurement, if you have the name of the tool, even if it's a paid tool, yes, you absolutely should mention it. So even if you're using, like, let's say I'm going to make something up, like the Brigance, even though you wouldn't use that for this, but just making it up. Using the Brigance, blah, 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 even though it is a paid thing, because it's specific for the method of measurement, this is what you're using, you're not necessarily saying that that person has to use that, because you wouldn't use an iPad.
So would you put, like, in a typing program, parentheses,
Yes.
example,
Yep,
typing
you
Yes,
could.
yes,
blah, blah, blah,
yes,
blah,
yes,
blah,
yes.
blah, blah, and then
Yes.
enter it.
Yes,
Okay, so
yes,
it's
yes,
just
yes.
like with text, so like using a digital tablet,
Yep.
parentheses, example, iPad,
Right.
student will use screen reader,
Yep.
example, voice.
Absolutely.
Just one.
And that way they have that information to know, okay, this is where those numbers come from, because if they switch and then the numbers on their other typing program is different, then they'll know.
Right, and that's what almost always happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But as long as you have the broad name or the
Yep.
broad term in there, it's fine.
you're fine. Yeah.
And then if you flip over, the last section is time frame. And there's two things that I really want to note. There's a lot of words on this page. I mean, it's a time frame. It's an IEP. So it has to be, the goal time frame has to be within a year. It can be less. So it can be less than a year. It just cannot be more than a year.
And there's really no way to miss this one because it's already in the IEP. Like, you have to put the date in. Like, I cannot imagine how you can't get this one right. Because even if you don't write it, maybe I shouldn't say this, but even if you don't write it in your goal, they will count it correct because the date is listed there to the monitoring team as the thing. Like, try to write it in your goal, but there's no way you can miss this one. This was like a freebie that the date is going to be in there.
And then the other important thing are your objectives. So considering how you want your objectives to be laid out. And here it gives a couple of examples. So sequential, so it could be working up to something, going from 10 to 15 to 20. It could be scaffolded, where they're working on prerequisite skills or lessening support. And then it could also be a combination of the two as well. So when you're working on those objectives, consider this when you're considering the time frame for those objectives.
Yes. And what we've learned is every county and school system has their own requirements of goals. We don't, of objectives.
Oh, my note, yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, we don't. So, like, some counties are like, you have to have 3 objectives. Sure. We don't require that, but it's kind of whatever Kristen says. Do whatever Kristen says.
I just wanted to mention something because again, something from the district I came from. We did not do our objectives that way, but many times there's like a goal with 4 objectives, and you have to accomplish 1 before you move on to 2, before you move on to 3, before you move on to 4.
Yeah.
So that's the place where I see like we have to really be careful, because if 2 monitoring periods have gone by and we're still on objective 1,
Yeah.
is there any way that we're possibly going to get to 4, right? So that's where you might want to do that amendment, and talk to the parent and say, listen, we're still struggling with 1. I'm going to, bump up the intensity. We're going to try this different method that I hadn't tried. so let's remove objectives 3 and 4 because we're probably not gonna get there. That would be okay, right, to do that without, yeah. Because I see that a lot, like we get to the closeout, it's like, well, we didn't even get to 2, 3, and 4 because we never mastered 1. And so you're kind of just like setting yourself up to not meet that goal if you haven't gone back and amended it, so.
Yeah. Absolutely, that's a great point, because I also came from a district where you had to do 1 and then 2, so it had to be sequential.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
No, absolutely, and that's another thing you can amend. So if you can see that, like, I'm still working in objective 1, so I'm definitely not going to get to 4 or the goal, that's the time you can have an amendment and just call the parent, do a PWN.
And let's say you realize, like you did 4, I'm just making it up, you did 4 objectives to get to the goal, you're nowhere near, but the kid will be able to reach the 3rd objective, change that to be your goal, right? Like if that was where the student is actually gonna be and now you have more information, like do the PWN to match that. But again, it depends on the goal. Like some of them aren't sequential, they don't have to be.
Yep. And just making sure that it's individualized to the student need, and that you can also progress monitor the objectives. So making sure that the objectives have the 5 components, which seems like a pain, but it'll help you with progress monitoring and it'll help you in the long run. Any questions? There's some good examples in the back too.
Are we ready for the breakout?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, so we're gonna do a little breakout activity. So if you can get into groups of 5, and what you're going to do is you're going to think of a student, or if you have your laptop, you can pull up a current IEP, and you're going to workshop a goal to make it compliant, right? So you can choose a student you already know, you can choose a goal that you already have into the system, and go through the 5 components to make sure it is, and Kristen and Shannon and myself will be moving around to if you guys have any questions.
Yeah, and feel free to move around the library.
Yeah, feel free to grab coffee.
Spread out. Do you want to do like 15, 20 minutes?
What time is it?
2:40.
So at 3 o'clock?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back at 3 o'clock. Yeah, good to see you. I'm upset being like, wait, did I say?
It's not in there yet. That goes first. Okay, you could say by the end of the IEP. So by the end of the IEP time.
January, you could just say by October 2024.
By Halloween
By Christmas
of 2024. Okay.
We got the
Given large print 2025 for contrast black background with white font.
Johnny will read
a passage.
Okay, good. I was going to say a paragraph. A passage.
At his instructional level.
Instructional at grade level.
No, that is instructional level.
That is instructional level.
That can be different.
At his instructional level.
No, how do, read it. What are you looking for while he's reading it? Accuracy, fluency, what are you looking for?
I hate these influency goals. I stay away from them.
I was working on one the other day for a kid.
Okay, so let's use that one. Let's go.
Well, I don't know that, it's not there yet. I just...
Well, let's work on yours. Use it.
By what?
Go ahead.
Two errors and he has to read with no more than 2 errors per reading session. But
2 errors over 3 passages, or over 3 trials, or over 3 sessions?
Let's say within 4 out of 5 consecutive sessions.
So if you're looking, so she's measuring accuracy, right? No,
Yeah,
that's accuracy. That's a piece of fluency. Fluency.
It has to do with rate and all of that stuff. That's why I don't mess with them.
Accuracy, authenticity, and expression. So the one that I wrote has all those components in it, so they're individual objections and needs.
Okay, so give it to us. By October 24, Johnny will.
Given a passage at their instructional reading level, presented either in Braille.
You know when you read that shit when it's time.
All of the given.
When it's time.
All of the given is. No, I don't know if it's right.
By October 24, we got the
I don't know if mine's right.
Oh, Lord.
There's a large print, point font, black background, white lettering.
She keeps interrupting me to read up. Sorry. Okay, listen, is anything missing? By October 2024, given a passage at Blake's instructional reading level presented either in hard copy or Braille or
Okay, I heard the given was material.
or in an accessible with Braille display in parentheses file. Creation will read orally with accuracy, automaticity, and expression during 4 out of 5 sessions per quarter for 3 out of 4 quarters.
Okay, I didn't hear anything about assistance.
So that's implied independence.
Okay.
So if you don't state it, it's implied.
Okay.
So what is the automatic?
I never knew that. See, I'm still learning.
So all those are components of fluency.
Right.
So
oh my goodness, I'm just learning that. So you know when I have been reading goals like that, I'm like, what does it specify? So if they're able to do it, does it matter? You just told me something new. I've been saying they met it, thinking that it doesn't matter how many prompts they were.
Wait, say that again? What?
So you said if it's not written, then it's implied that it's independent, but I never knew that. I thought if it wasn't written as independent, then you can apply to be given ample or unlimited prompts.
Independently or the number of prompts, just because.
Okay. I learned something new, that's all I'm saying. I've been lied on some people.
Is there a measurement criteria for automaticity?
So are they reading at a conversational rate? Like not stunted, disjointed speech while they're reading?
So that's what I'm wondering. If I didn't know your student and I had to listen to her people, how am I, like what measurement am I using for automaticity? What measurement am I using for?
She's reading orally, and I would. If it was my kid, I'd look up what automaticity means, and I would see that it's an oral, like, more of an anecdotal, I guess, because you're not, like, using a specific tool, but you're listening to hear, is it conversational, or is it jointed, or they phrases, things like that.
But if it were me, I would want a more specific measure because it sounds too subjective. Like to have the goal written in general, I think would be okay as long as there were measurements, stated. Yeah, as defined by blah blah blah, and then whatever.
Yeah, I think expression is subjective too. But under the National Reading Association, it's realistic. So,
how do they evaluate?
I don't think automaticity is
I mean, I guess it could be because if somebody is really a slow talker.
Yeah, but there's a difference between someone reading slowly and someone clearly struggling with reading.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of like standard measure for automaticity or
I mean, underneath that is like looking for them to read with all these things together. So there's expression, accuracy, and automaticity all
So
together.
if they don't have the expression, then what? They're not meeting it? So like if it's an exclamation point, but she just reads it at conversational level.
Right.
Because you're not meeting
Say you're reading it, it's not counting as fluent.
I wonder if that would pass. Like if you were to create like
I did.
Okay, I made a math one because math is just easy. I think math is easy.
reading? Oh, did you have
No,
to
she didn't say.
Oh, okay.
All right, I'm going to read the math goal. Okay.
All right, by October 2024, given a calculator, Johnny will solve real-world problems with 100% accuracy with
No more than one verbal prompt.
How often do you want me to do that?
Within, that's my new word that I picked up today. Within 4 out of 5 consecutive.
Or across.
Across. It's across. Yeah.
That's my new word, across.
Across 4 out of 5.
Do you really want them to be consistent? Does it matter the consecutive? Because what if they're...
No. Well, so does that have to be in it? That's the part I'm trying to
consecutive part
confuse on.
doesn't have to be.
So that's what I guess my question was worded
Sometimes I will
when I was
write
asking her, like,
2/4 of an IEP session, IEP period.
I think it depends on the student. So, like, if it's a kid with CBI, for example, and the goal has some kind of neuro component to achieving it, then consecutive would be a bad measure.
Right.
But if it's a kid that you know, once they've got it, then I think consecutive would make sense.
You just, I've been stuck before on the word consecutive, like they didn't mean it because it wasn't a consecutive session. So if you don't have to use it,
within any progress period, right?
Within 2 progress
within
periods
a
of the
quarter.
IEP.
Can we say within a quarter?
Within a quarter, sure.
Yeah,
then they
because
could
you
be
have so many months.
Oh, will it be within a quarter or across?
That's 4.
Right.
The fourth.
Which proposition word do we
across
use here?
4 out of 5 sessions, 3 out of 4 quarters.
What? Oh, Lord, it's
Or 2 out.
So they have a certain amount of effort
Across
and 4 out of 5 trials.
Yeah.
Maybe we did this
Maybe you
training.
need to make the sessions. Well, I think it depends on what
4 or
you're
5
doing.
trials, but you have to have that time frame of commitment.
Maybe you
I thought
don't.
it was by October 2024.
But
That
maybe,
doesn't count.
right.
Yes.
Maybe if you did
By,
10
yes.
trials, like it's a whole year, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you have 10 trials.
And it
so
could be
8 out of
any
10.
10 trials
Yeah.
At all.
in the year.
8 out of 10.
Right?
I think 4 out of 5 is not enough.
Well,
right, for the whole year.
Okay, so 10 out of 10 trials.
That's when
Or 8
you
out
might
of
do
10.
80%.
Yeah.
Right, and that's another thing. Some people rate it 8 out of 10 and some are 4 out of 5. It's like it's the same thing.
It is the same.
You know, and that's the question I was really trying to get to earlier, but I didn't think it came out.
I think it's so.
One problem like 3 out of 4, and then 75%, which is good because that's what taught me how to write it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I would put 80%, and then I would say something, and mathematically match.
Yeah.
So I started following what she did it. She was like, yeah, 3 out of 4, and 75%.
I like doing a percent accuracy over a certain number of trials. Like that's to me my favorite way to do it. But like when they're just learning, for example, functional braille words, you don't do phonically. You do with the IMA code. So if you get 100% of one word, that's not meeting the same target as if you get 100% of 5 words. So I always put a qualifier in there when student is presented with 5 different words, or given at least 5 different words in the. That's so I try to make it like that. So
instructional level.
So what's in there for everything? Type it up.
Yep.
You're the spokesperson. You already know.
why am I
What's your name?
I'm Jackie. Karina, it's very good to meet you.
Which building are you in?
I'm in the East Building.
She's at the very last room upstairs.
Which grade?
6th grade. Yeah, they're awesome.
Alright, so who's going to be our spokesperson?
I'm not. I'm
Me either. And I think I'm going to stay here.
Prompt level. We have to measure prompt level.
It's hard.
Okay, that makes sense because they're crossing streets. Yeah, there's danger. If I have to prompt you, then you shouldn't be alone.
So I use prompt level instead of accuracy. Sometimes, so like, in one kind of goal it would be 80% accuracy, and another kind of goal would be like with 2 prompts or fewer.
2 or less, or up to, or no more than.
No more than 2.
No more than 2
Yeah,
prompts per
it
trial.
is condition. It depends on what you're writing the goal about.
Right.
Alright, so this is going to be by October 2024. Given the calculator, John, you will solve real
What kind of calculator?
Talking, large print.
You can put that in parentheses.
Given a talking calculator.
Okay. Is it a scientific calculator?
No.
Okay, well then.
It just needs to talk. Given a talking calculator, John, you will solve real world problems at instructional level with 100% accuracy with no more than 1 verbal prompt across 8 out of 10 tries.
All right, go write it up then.
I'm not the first one.
I'm not right. Yeah, get it done. Get it over with.
Wait, do I have to really put
real
now
world
nobody's
problems
paying
at
attention.
instructional level. It just seems so. It's so many prepositions.
Yes.
It's killing me.
Yes, because just think about your student going off back to his like county school or something, and those students on the problem level up to that part.
Okay, in the given.
How do you want it written?
Give me can you rip out that page?
But you can't read this. This is same thing I told Josh. I said, you want lesson plans for me? This is how they come, and no one can figure them out for me.
Scan them in the scanner, and send it along.
My handwriting is.
Let me see if I have my lesson plan.
Jackie's got good handwriting. She's the artist.
Let me see if I can find my lesson plan.
Yeah, she did.
Was everybody able to come up here? Okay, and even if you weren't, it's okay. Okay, so we're gonna go through, and how did we get this? Is this the same marker as this? Or did you have your own marker? Did they bring, is this a different color?
Oh, there's a blue.
Oh, no, darn. Who used the blue? Okay, I can't see it. It's okay. So, it's okay. You'll read them. So, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through and read the goals, and we're all going to, as a team, talk about, does it have, we'll go through each of the components. All right, so the first goal.
I'm going to start with the paper.
Oh, perfect.
By October 2024, given a talking calculator, no more than 2 verbal prompts, and a real-world instructional level word problem, Johnny will solve the problem with 100% accuracy for 8 out of 10 sessions during the IEP cycle.
What are your
Read it again?
thoughts? Yeah, read it again. It's a lot.
By October 2024, given a talking calculator, no more than 2 verbal prompts, and a real-world instructional level word problem, Johnny will solve the problem with 100% accuracy for 8 out of 10 sessions during the IEP cycle.
So what I will say about that goal is I have no idea what you're measuring. So when you're saying the problem, are you talking about an addition problem? And are you talking about O&M? Are you talking about, I think it may have components, but I still don't know. I don't know what it is that you're actually doing.
I would agree.
I have a question. If it states a real world word problem, and then it's tiered in the objectives what that is that still
So that's a really good point. That let's talk about that. Your goal should stand alone on its own without reading the objectives. So we were talking about that with another group over here. So let's say in your objective you explained all of these things. Your goal needs to stand alone without the objectives telling you what the information is. Like the objectives can be sequential or they can have different parts of it. However, if I read the goal, it's not going to be, well,
I would think that sounds like it would be listed under the goal domain of math problem solving, right?
so what in math are they solving?
a real world problem.
Functional.
Right, but so what is it? Addition? What is it?
So in the objectives, it might state that they could, they will be able to write the expression and identify well, not 2 things, but will be able to identify the operation to use to solve the problem. Then step 2 is maybe they're finding the subtotal. Step 3 could maybe be, determining if they had enough money in order to purchase or complete that transaction.
We're getting the right change.
Right, things of that sort in the objectives rather than putting all that in parentheses in the word.
So, but just to keep in mind, your goal has to be on its own without the information feeding in from the objective. So the way it's currently written, I don't know what the child is supposed to be doing other than solve a problem.
How would you change it?
So it depends on what I'm looking for. So I might say solve 2
addition or subtraction.
Yeah, like solve an addition word problem. Like what is it specifically? Because a problem could be anything.
Yeah, but an addition word problem, then just you're stuck there. You